Hi and welcome back to my channel. In today's video you have my June wrap up. In June I participated in Whatever-a-thon as well as one of the gyms for JDB Reads Patreon only Pokeathon year-long readathon. If I remember, I will also mention what prompts for Whatever-a-thon that I used the books for. The first set of books that I read were the 2nd through the 5th of the Percy Jackson graphic novels. We have Sea of Monsters, The Titan's Curse, The Battle of the Labyrinth, The Last Olympian. I read the first of the books in graphic novel form in May, and I mentioned there that I think that I prefer the novel form of the book to the graphic novel, although I do definitely see the appeal of the graphic novels, especially for a series like this. The hesitation that I had in the first book continued in the second and the third, because in the second and the third you have the same illustrator, and because Percy does age a year for each of these books, it became sort of less of a problem, but he was drawn looking far more teenage wise than he should have been for a 12, 13, 14-year-old. In the adaptation, I think they did a reasonable job, but there were things missing that I remembered from the novel version that I wish would have been in the graphic novel as well. When you get to the 4th book, there was a gap in publication dates, about 4 years, and there's a different illustrator, and I really do like this illustration better. At first, it felt really weird and really cartoony, like Disney cartoony Hercules type style, but I think that this illustrator better captured the images for all of the characters. So I definitely prefer the illustration style in the 4th and the 5th books. And additionally, in the 4th and the 5th books, the story really gets going. The story is very episodic, and you know, like it could be a generic TV show or whatever in the first 3 books. They're good, and they're really well done. Next we have Red Famine by Anne Applebaum. I read this for Jess Owen's community read, but of the 2 books, the first one being The Gates of Europe and second one being Red Famine, I definitely preferred Red Famine to The Gates of Europe, but The Gates of Europe served a really good purpose in giving the background and building up the history that really helped me understand a lot of what was going on in Red Famine. In Red Famine, Anne Applebaum does have a brief section at the beginning where she talks about the history before she gets into the actual events of the famine that lasted off and on, although significantly, from 1921 to 1931-32, the most significant years were 31 and 32. There was an initial famine in 21 that got a lot of worldwide attention and humanitarian efforts, and I think that Herbert Hoover was actually involved because he was part of the US's food aid to Europe after World War I. But in 31 and 32, you've got so much gaslighting going on by the Soviet government in ignoring and hiding the fact that there was this famine and so many people were dying, and this was completely man-made. There are so many parallels in how this history is told with things that I am personally passionate about, like telling the story of the Armenian genocide. Anne Applebaum has a section in here, I don't know whether it's a chapter or 2, on how this story was told and how so many of these records were taken and they were hidden and they were ignored or they were destroyed. And that's what makes telling this story so difficult. And when you look at tricky parts of history, you will see how often that has happened, how often the perpetrators hide the evidence, destroy the evidence. Even today, there's not a lot of people that will tell the story honestly of the famine and what happened there. And you can see the roots of the current conflict in this famine and the generational trauma that it inflicts. The next 2 books are audiobooks. I read the first 2 books in the Tawny Man trilogy. So we start with Fool's Errand. And with Fool's Errand, I loved it so much because we get to return to Fitz and the world that Robin Hobb creates. It feels like home when you get back to it, even though there's so much going on. And in Fool's Errand, you deal with all of the ramifications from what happened at the end of Assassin's Quest, which were briefly summed up at the end, but you don't see how it unravels. That's what I love so much about Fool's Errand, is you are seeing the long-term effects and how this has built up in the 15 years between the 2 trilogies, how it's affected Fitz as a man now. But you see all of the effects because you have characters coming back that he hasn't seen in 15 years. Characters that mean a lot to him, like Chade, like the Fool. You see what happens with the decisions that he's made with his relationship with Starling. You see his relationship with Hap, and Hap is the child who in these 15 years he's actually gotten to parent. Now Hap is not his child. Hap is a sort of a foster kid that Starling found and gave to Fitz, and so he is able to have a child that he was raising because he missed that with his daughter. And then you see his learning to come to grips with the skill, his newfound skill with the skill, and the fact that he hasn't been taking elf bark. And you see him dealing with the wit and helping Prince Dutiful with the wit, because Prince Dutiful is the legitimate heir to the Six Duchies throne, and he has both the skill and the wit. And you get this brought in with the Piebalds. And I know that that's going to make more sense once I get the novella. I thought Fool's Errand was great. It's very slow moving in the first half, which you need, but it really picks up in the second half. Then we get to Golden Fool. And in Golden Fool is a setup book. A lot of important stuff happens in Golden Fool, but the plot goes basically nowhere. I still love it. It's Robin Hobb. I adore her writing. It just is comforting, even though she puts her character through really traumatic things. But Golden Fool is the first and so far only Robin Hobb book that has earned less than 5 stars. It's still a 4.5. Still really, really good. But because the plot went nowhere, I don't know, probably on a reread, it might go up. Next we have Errand, An Arrow to the Moon. This was a bonus book that I got in either Illumicrate or Fairy Loot. I can't remember which one. And I knew that I wanted to try Emily X. Harpan's writing. I've heard a lot of really good things about her first book, The Astonishing Color of After. And when I heard this talked about, I knew I wanted to read it, and then we got it as a bonus book, and it's absolutely gorgeous with the foiling. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. This book is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, also combined with Chinese mythology, but it's not a fantasy. It's magical realism. And I didn't think I was a huge fan of the magical realism genre, and I think that's because some of the only exposure I've had to it is with Gabriel Garcia Marquez and studying it in class when I was working on my Spanish minor and doing the literature classes. This magical realism worked so well. It's set in a modern setting. You have 2 protagonists. You have Hunter and you have Luna, and you have their families who are arch rivals. There you get the Romeo and Juliet, but also there's things about Chinese mythology that keep getting brought up throughout the book. And the way that Emily X. Harpan, it's not like she's withholding information, but she's just giving you as much as you need at the time. And you think you want more, but you know that's all that you actually need. Well, you don't know that. Emily X. Harpan knows that. And it's multi-perspective. The primary perspectives are Hunter and Luna, but you get perspectives from Hunter's brother, you get perspectives from the quote-unquote bad guy, you get perspectives from the parents. It's really well done. Both families are from Taiwan. There's even a section in here where Emily X. Harpan brings in some of the cultural issues that really exist today with people in Taiwan who believe they're Chinese, or people who believe that they're Taiwanese and they are completely separate, and all of that, that there's a lot that goes into that culturally that people like myself don't really necessarily understand. And you wouldn't think that it would fit in a book like this, but it did. Obviously, Emily Exarpan did not deal on that, but she didn't shy away from it either. I adored this book. Next we have Pointless, an English teacher's guide to more meaningful grading. I love this concept of not making grades and numbers be the be-all end-all. This book, though, just struck me as highly idealistic in what you can do and the ability of the students to be able to reflect on their own learning. I guess I would have to say that I'm a bit of a cynic, a bit of a pessimist, although I would hopefully call myself a realist. But just knowing what I know, this might work in upper level, like AP level courses. And she used a lot of examples from her AP Lit course, which, okay, I totally get. Those students, they're probably going to be capable of the reflection and the learning and the type of learning that Zerwin talks about in here. I just don't think, especially from at the middle school level, which is the only experience I have of teaching English, it's probably less than, you know, 2 hands, the number of students that would be able to do this sort of thing. I don't know. This just seems highly idealistic. I love the idea. I love it being about the learning and not the points. Ultimately, though, I might pull stuff from this if I were still teaching ELA. I might, but I just don't think that this is feasible. Now, going slightly out of order, but to keep the theme going about education's related books, we have A Novel Approach by Kate Roberts. This was a book that the ELA department chair gave out to all the ELA teachers at the end of the last year that I taught ELA. This is definitely a book geared towards English teachers, which I am not an English teacher anymore. I really like a lot of the things that Kate Roberts was saying in here about using novels and how to use whole class novels and book clubs and things like that to encourage students to gain a love of reading and not just sticking with the things that you know and the things that you're able to accomplish. So I thought this was decent. I enjoyed this one a lot more than Pointless. I just read it really quickly just because it no longer applies to me. Next we have what might end up tied. Right now, it's my favorite book of the month. It might end up tied with Fool's Fate, but we have Warbreaker. I love Brandon Sanderson's writing. Nightblood is the sentient sword in this novel, and it is so, I love Nightblood. He's such an interesting and unique character, and a booktuber that I was watching like yesterday, in one of her videos, she had a shirt it had a quote from Nightblood. It was like, "Good morning, would you like to destroy some evil today?" And if you've read Warbreaker, you know why that's so funny, because Nightblood is a sentient being created with the breaths, and his purpose is to destroy evil, but he did not a human, so he doesn't understand what evil actually is. So all he wants to do is like destroy. And so if you read this book, you know it's catastrophic what happens when he is actually wielded. Again, similar with Elantris. I started off this book not necessarily 100% invested, but I knew that something was coming based on my experience with Elantris. But the way that, so this was a little bit difficult to get into because the world building and the magic system explaining starts, boom, with the prologue. With Vasher, you get all these descriptions of the magic system, and so you're spending chapters upon chapters trying to figure and really understand what's happening. But I knew that it would get explained, and I knew that I would understand it and really love it. The magic system in here, top notch. And it's multi-perspective. Primarily, you have Vivenna and Ciri. They are the two sisters. Vivenna is supposed to marry the God King, but at the last minute, their father goes, "No, I love you too much, so I'm going to sacrifice your younger sister." Weird. So he sends the younger sister, and so much gets unfolded. You also have a lesser god, which is Lightsong. I love him. A handful of other minor perspectives in here. But the way that Sanderson unfolds the story, it moves so slow in the beginning. That's because you have to build the solid foundation. And I think that's what a lot of authors don't understand. They want it to be engaging from the get-go. They want the reader to, obviously they want the reader to keep reading, but they neglect building a solid foundation. And that's what Sanderson does. He builds this solid, rock solid foundation, and then once things get going, they just go. I knew it. About 65–70% through, something changes, and immediately I'm going, why did I not see that? There was something about these particular characters in the back of my mind. I'm like, something's not right here. Something's not right here. And then when it was revealed, I'm like, oh, that's what was nagging at me. I just couldn't figure it out. And then something happens with Lightsong towards the end, and I'm going, he's gonna do X, and then he does X, and it's still like, ah, phenomenal. And I want the sequel, but I know it's not going to come for years because he's working on Stormlight and Secret Projects and Mistborn. Absolutely phenomenal. Next, we have a surprising read, and that is Gallant. So I have read 4 other V.E. Schwab books, and I haven't disliked any of them, but none of them have really stood out to me. This one is not my typical genre. I really liked this so much more than I thought. This is like young YA gothic fantasy. It's not horror, although there's some horrific elements to it. And those elements are not typically elements that I look for. But the way that Schwab writes Olivia, the main character, I thought was brilliant. So Olivia can't speak. She doesn't know why she can't speak. No one knows why she can't speak. And you as the reader, you never find out. It's not magically fixed. And in this, she was abandoned at an orphanage, finishing school when she was 2. And she just had her mother's journal. That was the only personal possession that she had. And then right about when she's about to get turned out of the finishing school, she's too old for it, this letter comes. And it's from her uncle inviting her to the family home. She's glad. She thinks, well, maybe I'll finally have a family. But in the back of her mind, she remembers the last thing that her mother wrote in the journal. And it's like, you'll be safe as long as you don't go to Gallant, which is the name of the family home. And so much unfolds throughout this about the family home and the family itself and what happened to her mother and who her father was, because she never met her father. It's really well done. I enjoyed how the story unfolded, but then we get to the end. And the end is what let me down the most about this. The end fits. The end is logical. I just don't like it. But I think I have a more positive view and rating on this book than a lot of people that I've seen review it recently, because this is a fairly new release. Next, we have something that is definitely not a new release, and that is The Great Hunt. It had been a while since I started this. I read The Eye of the World back in November, I think, is when the Amazon Prime adaptation was coming out. And one thing I noticed about this book that really annoys me is the sticker doesn't say it now on Amazon Prime. It says soon to be. Like, I'm reading this and they're filming season 2. This is a printed on sticker and it's outdated so quickly. Bookish pet peeve right there. But I read the first one and I read it very slowly over a long period of time, and I read it right before I was going to bed and I was falling asleep, and it was good. And I just wondered, did I not give it a good chance? And I think that pausing on my reread, not on my reread, I haven't read these before, pausing on my read through the series was a really good thing, because in between when I read Eye of the World and tried to start The Great Hunt, I have read a lot of adult epic fantasy, and I think It had been a long time since I had read adult epic fantasy. I think I gave it a better shot now. And one of the things that I'll say is that Robert Jordan's writing is dense. Like, this is adult epic fantasy in the vein of Tolkien, not in the vein of Sanderson. Sanderson's writing is not dense. Jordan's writing is, which is interesting because Sanderson finishes up the series. So I wonder what I will think when I get to the Sanderson novels, because I do plan, I'm a completionist, I'm an achiever, I will be reading the whole series. I think a little bit of my enjoyment definitely was factored in by the fact that I was dealing with sinus pressure on the left side of my face, which is my weak eye. So it wasn't necessarily an enjoyable read, but that had nothing to do with the book itself. I enjoyed this. I thought the plot is really well done, really intricate. There's a lot going on. I can't put my finger on what was missing for me to make it a stellar read. This was average. I put it through Compile 3.5. That's like a B+ for me. So really well done. Just not like standout. I just think I don't have the connection to the world yet that a lot of people do who love it. And because it's so dense, I think that there's a lot more that you pick up on reread. We shall see. And last in this first section of the month, we have a graphic novel that I have not yet hauled, but that is Wake. And so this is just the dust jacket. I'm pulling up the dust jacket first because I want to show the cover, the actual hardback, in just a moment. So I wanted to see if I could find graphic novels that weren't just adaptations of novels, which has primarily been what I have read, which I think is a good way to get into the genre. And so when I went on this spur of the moment little book shopping trip, I saw this and went, I want to get it. And I'm so glad that I did. The title is Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts. I will say, as a historian, if I were critiquing the historiography of this book, I would have an issue with this subtitle. I think a better subtitle could have been chosen for the book. And I think if you go into it with the mindset of you're getting an actual history book and you're learning about specific revolts that were led by women, you're not going to get that in this book. So here's the actual hardcover. And one of the things that you may notice in this is that, so you have New York City, and then you have waterfront, and you have a reflection, but the reflection that you see in here is not the top part, it's the historical part. And that's one of the things that I loved about the artistry, the illustration in this book. And it is illustrated by Hugo Martinez. Brilliant illustrator. I love the way that he illustrated this. And so in this book, you have both a little bit of a history, but it's more memoir of Rebecca Hall's journey researching her dissertation. And as a historian who's gone through not a dissertation, but a master's thesis, when you are going to these different places and you're trying to find the history, you're trying to dig it up and trying to discover it, a lot of times it's not easily available, especially if what you are looking for has been purposely obfuscated. That resonated with me, so I really enjoyed that. And overall, I think that this book more talks about how the history has been told and how these women have been so marginalized that some of these women that she's talking about in this book, you don't actually know what happened to them. You don't know the end of the story. One of them you never learn her name. Her name is never recorded. But a lot of times with these records, we don't get that. So I thought that this was a brilliant book, and I'm going to see if I can find one of the illustrations that really gripped me. So anytime that you had water, a reflection, a mirror, glass, you needed to look there. So the way that the story was told, I appreciated so much, especially the illustrations. The way that the images that Hugo Martinez drew illustrates what was told in this book are top notch. They are brilliant, and that's why I think this story needs to be told in a graphic form. Really well done. So the next few books that I read are the books that I read up until the 15th of June. I have decided to split my wrap up this month just because I keep reading so many books, and May's wrap up was 33 books long, and it was a much longer video than I typically like producing. One of them is a set that I will talk about altogether. And that one is the graphic novel series March by John Lewis. So there are 3 graphic novels in here that each get successively larger. And in this graphic novel series, I'm going to set this down because this is not light. So in the graphic novel series, John Lewis tells his story of his experience during the civil rights movement. In the first book, he does take a little bit of time and talk about his growing up years, but that's just a handful of pages. The last book in the 3 ends with the 1963 March on Washington, most famous for MLK's I Have a Dream speech. John Lewis was also one of the speakers at that march. Now, the setup for this series is bookended by Barack Obama's inauguration day, his first inauguration day in 2009. The setup for the story is John Lewis is getting ready at his office, getting ready to walk over. Obviously, he's going to be an honored participant in this inauguration, and a grandmother comes by with her 2 grandsons to see his office, not expecting him to be there. He just happens to be there at that time. The boys obviously are really interested, and they ask questions about different things that they see in the office. And so he starts telling them this story. So the setup of his flashbacks, which are the majority of the graphic novels, are him telling the story to this younger generation. And I know that from reading some of the author's notes and things like that, that his goal, his purpose in writing these graphic novels and having his memoirs be produced as a graphic novel was to tell the story to a younger generation. So I love how the graphic novels themselves incorporate that aspect, which I think is phenomenal. I really loved the visual representation tied in with the really powerful imagery of the words that go through this time period. So I think that this is yet another phenomenal example of a graphic memoir. Next we have The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince. This is one of Robin Hobb's short stories, and it talks about very early on generations of the Farseer line, way before Fitz comes into the picture. The purpose of this story, I think, it's to help explain the prejudice against the witted, which we know and we see throughout all of the, at least what I've read, all of the Fitz-centered books. And one of the other things that I really loved about this, because at the root, so I will get to that other thing, at the root of the story, at the root of the prejudice against the witted, you have 2 young men, you have a woman, and you have a throne. And there is jealousy and really bad actions on the part of one man and his group, his entourage, that leads to the downfall of the other, the witted one. And the way that that is portrayed, the way that the winners tell their story, you can see how, in this case, it was about the wit. But if you think about things that people have prejudice in real life, you can see how people use these nonsense stories and their power behind it to alienate and isolate and villainize people that are not like them, people that they don't understand. And you can see the applicability, and you can see how this is done in other circumstances, other quote-unquote real life circumstances. And that was one of the most powerful things that I got out of it. Now, this is probably the lowest rated out of the Robin Hobb books that I have read or potentially will read. it's only a 4-star for me. And that's primarily because the thing that I love most about this, the characterization, is a little bit missing. So the story is actually told from the viewpoint of Felicity, who is a maid to Princess Caution, who is the mother of the so-called Piebald prince. And when the portion where she is the maid to Princess Caution and she's telling the story and events that are happening to her as well, really engaging. But there's a point where the story shifts and she is telling what she is observing. She is telling what her own son is observing and told her. And when the story shifts to that point, there's a bit of a disconnect in the characterization. And that is what keeps me from giving it a higher rating. But overall, this is a really good novella. The last book that I read in the first half of May is Blood Scion. I have been looking forward to reading this book ever since I saw Princess over at Castle Library mention it, I think in a haul video. And she talked about how frustrated she is at white content creators making negative reviews about this book, about the violence and things included in this book, and say that they were surprised to see it in there, that it caught them off guard, or things like that, or it was negative, when there is literally content warnings right here when you open the book up. As someone who is not of color, I don't have that heritage, I share a lot more complexion-wise and similarity with these other people that she was talking about. It really frustrates me when people villainize a traumatic story that they don't know about and they think, oh, that's too graphic for sensitive young readers. And yes, you need to know the sensitivity of the reader. Are they able to handle it? But there are adults who might not be able to handle some of the things mentioned in this book and described in this book. Deborah Fillet does not hold back from a lot of the things that she discusses in here, and I really appreciate her for that. This is a lot more in your face with the horrific things that colonization has done in this fantastical world. But there's a lot to deal with in here. I thought a lot of the things that Deborah Fillet portrays in this book were really profound. The main character is a Scion, meaning she is a descendant of one of the Yoruba gods. I forget which one. But what it means is her blood like contains this magic flowing through her veins that is fire based, and she can literally like incinerate things. And she has to hide that though, because Scions are basically killed on sight. Not only are the Scions killed on sight, but their entire families are killed on sight. But the government of this world is fighting a battle, a war that's gone on for a year, trying to exterminate the Yoruba and all the Scions. Because it's gone on for so long, there's a draft instituted. And you are eligible for the draft as soon as you turn 15. She turns 15 and is drafted. And she has to basically go into the belly of the beast, where they are training people to kill people like her, Yorubas, Scions. But there's a portion in the training where they have to go and they're sitting in a classroom. And I forget what it's called in the book, but it's basically brainwashing. They are telling the story of the history as they want it to be known. They pick out all of these graphic, horrific images, they cherry pick them out, and then they make fast conclusions based on that. And they paint themselves to be the victors, to be the champions, to be the ones in the right. And it's really profound to think about that and how that is changing and affecting people. I won't use the word enjoyment because that is not a word that you use in relation to this book. I'll use the word experience. I ultimately gave this book 4 stars, which is a really, really good read for me. But what kept it from me giving it 5 stars were twofold. One is just me as a reader. So there is a level of tension going throughout this book where the main character faces danger on every single page. And you're so tense as you read it. Me as a reader, this is just me personally as a reader, that's not my favorite. I don't like constant tension. I like a little bit of time where you can take a breath, recover, and rebuild. The other thing that brought it down for me, and I don't know if this is her debut or not. If it is, I can see that. At the end, there are a lot of reveals and twists and turns, which you can expect. You can expect that there's going to be something unexpected at the end. The thing for me was, it did it so many times that it felt like it was doubling back on itself and tripping itself up. There were so many times towards the end of this book where I had to flip back multiple pages and reread because I didn't understand what had happened and how we had gotten to this next part. Because that's at the end, that's one of the last things that you remember about your experience in the book. I do recommend this book, but cautiously, only because I know that there are some people who it may be triggering for. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this book, hence the content warning in the front. Look that up if you're interested, but I do recommend this book because it is very thought-provoking throughout a lot of it, where you're contemplating the ramifications of the things as they are going on. So that wraps up the first half of my June wrap up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.